Sure. Sure it's the
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call the meeting of the Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee to order. First item is the minutes of the October 22nd meeting. Did everyone have a chance to review?
I did.
And do I have a motion?
You have a
Or
motion to
change?
approve. Anybody have changes? Okay. To approve the October 22nd, 2014 minutes.
Okay.
Second.
We have a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Items 3 and 7 were for information. Does anyone have a question? Councilwoman?
I do have a question on item 4, proposed bus service changes.
Maria Hyatt and Jesus Stefan are here and answer
Thank
your
you, with
questions
great
on transit.
speed and much appreciated.
We ran.
So I think I mentioned to you, we have some folks in the Levine, South Phoenix area, south of Buckeye, who are hopeful that we will think of them more as we do this bus service changes.
And it is not possible to do that as part of the April changes, but we can definitely take that into consideration for the next changes, which will be in October. Reasons for that are that we've already posted the schedule for the hearings, and in order to meet FTA's compliance on the open houses and the outreach, we need to post all of the potential route changes or impacts as part of that review process, and they were not included at that point. But we will work with you and the community to determine what their priorities are and see what we can do for the October 20, gosh, it sounds so far away, October 2015 changes.
Wonderful. We'll tell them also to make in touch with the folks on the Citizens Commission on the future of transportation. Thank you so much.
Are there any other comments or questions? None? Then we will go to item 8, which is the Northwest Phase Light Rail Extension.
You wanted to call, Madam Chair and subcommittee members, for the Northwest Phase 2 Light Rail Extension, Albert Santana is here. You're familiar with this project, I know, in your district, and this is a really important extra piece to the existing expansion that's underway now. And we do have some recommended action that you recommend council approval of. I did just want to mention one thing to highlight in the items you skipped over. It was actually really a nice, I think you were trying to call my attention to that. Item number 6,
Right.
really a nice award for the Water Services Department. And actually, Catherine Sorensen and I went down and celebrated with the wastewater staff at the 23rd Avenue treatment plant. It's really hard to have superb performance year after year after year after year, and that's exactly what they did, and they won an award for it. And we just didn't have time on this agenda to do a full presentation, but I wanted to make sure you got a chance, if you didn't get a chance to read it, that you were aware of that, because it's fantastic work by a lot of very highly professional technical employees in that unit. So I think that's, you were trying to catch my attention on that, is that
Yes,
correct?
I was, and I just wanted to thank all the employees and Catherine for their leadership in winning this award.
Yes, thank you. I meant to bring that up and just skipped right over because I know we have to be out of this meeting by 2:30.
All right.
So,
Well,
okay, Albert, you're on.
well, on that note, we've got a very quick presentation here, and Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, this is an update on where we are with the Northwest Extension Phase 2 project. The first slide here just is a quick history. This is an extension that has had a little bit of life in the sense of initially it was a one-phased project from the Christown area right at 19th Avenue in Montebello, and then about 5 miles to the Metro Center Mall area just on the east side of I-17 on 25th Avenue in Mountain View. And then in 2007, there were some modifications to phase the project in an effort to get some momentum going and getting us about 3 miles north to 19th Avenue in Dunlap. So as you see there on the second bullet point, when the project was split, Phase 1 is under construction now, which you all very much know, and that's scheduled to be open in early parts of 2016. And then this project we're here to talk about today is Phase 2, which currently is showing an operational date for 2026. One of the things that had recently happened right around the time when we started construction on Phase 1, obviously there was a lot of momentum and a lot of visibility to the entire Northwest Extension project, and And a lot of the community members, specifically the leadership through Councilwoman Williams and Councilman Gates, we had a meeting right around the same time we started construction for Phase 1 at the Metro Center Mall area. And it included a lot of members from the community, specifically the business community, and talking about, we know that the line currently shows a terminus at 25th Avenue and Mountain View on the east side of the freeway. However, with this resurgence of the Metro Center Mall area and really trying to find a catalyst to get the mall going in the direction that the community wanted, could we look at adjusting the alignment and getting to the west side of the freeway? At that time, city staff then partnered with Valley Metro staff and began to look at that in what we call project definition. And in essence, what we're trying to do is to determine the feasibility of moving that alignment a little less than, well, much less than a mile to get across the freeway and have a terminus that would better serve the Metro Center Mall area. So some key elements that we've been working on over the past year or so: public involvement. We always include public involvement because at the end of the day, that's what these systems are for. They're there to serve the community. We started looking at station locations and the effect that if we were to cross, where would the stations need to be located to best serve the public? Also, pedestrian and bicycle access. We know now, especially when we look at complete streets, high-capacity transit corridors, that we have to have the multimodal connection, so we added that element. Of course, looking at land use and economic development, specifically at the Metro Center Mall area. What they were looking at there is that there truly are 4 ways to get into this very large area that has a lot of potential, and how can we maximize or take better advantage of having economic development there if we were to introduce the light rail system. And then lastly, looking at some environmental checklists, really at a higher level though, just looking at potential right-of-way impacts, and then also what would the view corridor look like if we were to add this infrastructure crossing the freeway. So when you go from the map that we had there, in the green is the map that we are showing today, and the solid lighter green is what will be done by 2016. So the white dot represents the station that will be located at the southwest corner of 19th Avenue and Dunlap. What we would then do is proceed west on Dunlap to about 25th Avenue, which we would have a station in that area on 25th Avenue and Dunlap, and then head north to right around Mountain View and be just on the north side of Mountain View. And that is where we're proposing where we would have the light rail crossing of the I-17. And I know it's a little hard to see there, but that orange color is how the train would then land itself there on the Metro Center Mall. And for those of you who are familiar with the area, it would just be between the Super Salad and the frontage road. We know that we can't impact the Super Salad. It is historically protected, but we do think that there's a way to try to incorporate that. We also placed, I share your sentiment, but the star that's on there too is we do recognize the current location for the transit center is on the southwest corner of the mall property, and that at the beginning, with this project now being introduced, that we would need to relocate that so we would have a more of a seamless multimodal connection. So that's what we would be proposing as far as the modification to this alignment. Here's a schedule. I'm sorry.
How close is that to the library, the city library that's within that distance?
It's within the quarter mile, the 5-minute walking distance. So it's just to the southeast of it.
Perfect.
Okay. And then here is a schedule. Right now we're still in that first part of it, which is the planning schedule, but today's action is very important because with this action we would be able to start the process to go back through the regional process and make this modification or this amendment to the regional transportation plan, and also that at the beginning of next year we would begin to then implement the environmental assessment process where we could really start to delve into the details and get this area environmentally cleared for a future project. And the next slide I'm going to apologize for because like with every light rail action, they're always very long, but very important because we need certain things to be in the motion. But with that, we would recommend that the subcommittee recommend to the City Council to amend the locally preferred alignment and then coordinate with Valley Metro and Maricopa Association of Governments to initiate the process of updating the region transportation plan, include Northwest Phase 2 into the extension alignment modification. And then last would be for us to initiate the to include us into any proposed extension of the Transit 2000 tax that we have. And with that, we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have questions? Councilman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just a question on the transit center at Metro Center. So we have the one there now. You know, we've invested in that. Frankly, where that's at, it has great access, like where the movies are and the food court. I mean, it's kind of a gathering spot there. So I'm guessing, though, that the reason you have the transit center being very close to the freeway over on the east side is because it's saved the cost that we would incur to build the rail all the way over there. Just maybe you can talk about why here as opposed to
Well,
where
a
it's
lot-
at now, where it's already been constructed.
Madam Chair, Councilman Gates, a lot of it is the multimodal connection. So what we would like to do is to have all of our bus facilities, since we would have a light rail station on that side for people to be able to make that connection between bus and rail to bus. If we were to leave them where they are and we had a light rail station along the frontage road, but yet to make the multimodal connection, you would have to have quite a commute to get to and from the bus rail.
No, I understand that. I guess my question is why wouldn't you put the light rail over there where the transit is? And that's what I'm saying. Is it
gotcha.
because of the cost to
Yes.
get it all the way around the mall?
We did look at a crossing specifically at Dunlap that would have then went through right around, I think it's like 26th Avenue.
Yeah.
There were just a lot of technical issues that we had. Currently, there's a lot of, from a traffic volume and backup, that intersection there already has that issue. There's some issues in regards to the flooding in the area and just drainage as well. We also have, as you come through Dunlap and try to make your way into Metro Center, that we have a major water resource plant as well. They're just on the north side of Dunlap. And also in working with the mall and trying to have that connection, because at 25th Avenue and Dunlap, and as you go north and south in that area, there are a lot of educational institutions, and we know today that means a lot of ridership for us. Yeah. So in working with specifically the Carlisle Group and some other major stakeholders, they thought that having a crossing there at Mountain View and trying to better easily relocate the bus facility versus spending the extra time and technical challenges of making the light rail get out. And then last but not least, where we have it in this map here, we know that in the future, even beyond this, that there's a desire to continue even more north and possibly more west. So being able to be along that frontage road gives us really easy access to Peoria, where we can make decisions on where we would go from there, versus being in that area where we have the ring road inside the mall.
Madam Chair and Councilman Gates, I also want to add one thing. Your question's a very good one, and there is another advantage of moving the transit center over toward the freeway as well, and that is that we're currently studying, working with MAG and ADOT, the possibility of a multimodal, having that bridge be multimodal, and that there would be a direct HOV off-ramp from that, from the I-17 freeway, so that rapid buses and other buses will be able to exit right there, get people to the rail. So if you live in Anthem and the rail hasn't reached you yet, you could maybe take a rapid bus down and connect right there at Metro Center. So this could be a really major multimodal transportation hub. And from the bus side of things, that accessibility would be just fantastic. And we're looking at that and evaluating it right now.
And then just a couple other things. Number one, I mean, the key to, I'm supportive of this. You know, the key to all this though is ADOT. I mean, because this bridge, obviously we're taking on a lot more cost. I think it's worth it, but maybe you can just talk a little bit about what we're doing with ADOT, how this is all going to work and what that partnership looks like and how doable we really think this is.
Chair Williams, Councilman Gates, ADOT has been a part of the coordination in going through this study, and what we're proposing here allows the flexibility for ADOT to do what Rick described, which is whether it's direct HOV in the middle. They've also talked about doing some things that are frontage road. They are still well into their planning stages. They are taking on even a bigger study, which is called their spine study, that's going to incorporate and talk about this being one of their spot improvements. But given the timing of where their study is at versus the timing of where this is at, we felt that it was important for us to advance that this is how we technically would get light rail across, but we still leave an envelope and enough flexibility for them to do whatever modifications that they would do as a part of their study. So they'll be a part of this each step of the way, and then as we begin the environmental work, they will be at the table as well to make sure that everybody understands which direction we're heading.
And we have a presentation of the spine study from MAG scheduled for your next subcommittee meeting in December.
And then just, if I might, Rose Mofford. So first of all, and I guess I left this out. Hey, light rail, maybe we'll come to District 3. So this is exciting. Sorry.
That's on the final slide. It has it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Here with this proposed route, it runs right by Rose Mofford Park. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that. You know, the impacts, potential impacts on the park. It's a wonderful asset in the community, and talk about how you've looked at that.
Yeah, and
issue.
Chair Williams, Councilman Gates, actually, I started my career like in 1996 working at Rose Mofford Park as a recreation instructor. But knowing what I do know about that, it's a great facility, and obviously they've added to that park. But a lot of sporting events, lots of recreation activities. Just where we have a station there, they added another amenity to the southern end of that park. So we think that this is another option from a transportation perspective for people to be able to access that. They have a very active recreational basketball courts there. Then when you have the softball groups there, parking can become an issue with what they have. So this is just another option for people to be able to get there and have even more people there without having overcrowding with parking.
Thank you.
Did you have a question, Councilwoman?
I did have a question. I happened to be around that area this weekend on Saturday, and what I noticed also is that they had like a farmer's market, or they had a market happening around in that parking lot area. So as we advance into this phase, will there be areas where people can gather and do an event near the
Yeah, I mean, and so Chairwoman, Councilwoman Pastor, those are all things that we definitely would look at. And for example, when the one we're working on now, that's a little further ahead, that ends at 19th Avenue and Dunlap. So we typically would have a public type process and see at these different station areas, what type of public amenities should we do? And for example, at 19th Avenue and Dunlap, they wanted an area just like what you described, something they can maybe do a farmer's market at, or a place where the community could gather. So absolutely, those are things that we'd be looking at.
in shade, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Albert. I know you've worked diligently on this, and I deeply appreciate it. Councilman Gates and I have been very involved in this process, anxious to revitalize this entire area, and I am absolutely convinced this is what will turn that whole area around. And so does the mall owners, and many of the Ring Road owners are making investments that they probably wouldn't have made, but they're doing it because they have seen your map and they are convinced the city is going to proceed. They're hopeful it is before 26, that is much sooner, but I think it is very important that we continue to go and do these steps in advance. Keep our fingers crossed. ADOT will come through sooner rather than later, and that our transportation renewal will happen so that it sets it all into motions. But I want to thank you and Maria both for being so committed and really working through all the kinks and being so creative. I think the station that will be at Metro Center is going to be unique and very impressive. I know the mall owner was so pleasantly surprised because he was worried that it would take out parking and interfere with some of the other businesses and plans that they have for the future, and this doesn't, and it really sets it up to continue to go to the northwest, and I'm hoping it does someday, and the other cities will recognize Surprise, Peoria, Glendale, the value, and make the connection, because there's a lot of opportunity out there, and I think once they have it, they will recognize the economic value. So anyone want to make a motion?
I would like to make, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, did you have a
We
question?
have a public comment.
Oh, Marvin.
I'm afraid I shot you all in the foot back in 1997
Shame on you.
when I brought to ADOT that they needed to do a double deck on I-17 like they did in Texas going into Austin. And they thought I was crazy. In 2001, they came back and said, "You're right, we're going to do it." And that's what's been holding this up all along. Have you been able to get anything out of ADOT at this point, commitment-wise?
There's no signed check.
I'll pray.
So,
We really need that in that area. Thank you.
okay, we have a motion. Any other comments, questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Now we will go to the other end.
So really, Madam Chair, this is the next step in the progression of the South Central Light Rail Extension, which you all have taken action on earlier this year.
Okay, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. So like Rick said, this is the next step in a process that has been very supported and has gone very well over the last couple of years pertaining to the South Central corridor. So just again, a quick background as to what's progressed. So back in April of 2014 is when the City Council approved the initial locally preferred alignment, otherwise known as LPA, and then also defined light rail as the mode down Central Avenue, and then approved for us to go back and, now that we had the alignment approved, really look at what's the roadway configurations and where would the exact locations for the stations be. So that's what we're here to recommend action on today. Also, as a part of that, because this is going to be in addition to the region's transportation plan, we are currently going through that. So we have a couple of things that are happening at parallel times. Recently in September, the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors also approved this locally preferred alignment. And we were fortunate enough to receive the city's first Tiger grant in our city's history since the implementation of that program. And it was a $1.6 million Tiger grant specifically for planning efforts to complete our environmentals. So that's what we'll also be coming to council on some action on sooner than later. As we began to look at the alignment starting in April, some things stood out to us is that this corridor is very unique in the Phoenix area. Today, South Central is 4 lanes. There's 2 lanes in each direction. But unlike a lot of places in Phoenix, you don't have the roadway, the sidewalk, a sea of parking, and then you have the entrance into the Target or Walmart, for example. A lot of the area, especially when you get south of Broadway, is that you have buildings and businesses right back of sidewalk, and so, which is great from a transit-oriented development perspective, because we want people to have great access from the bus and rail and go straight into wherever their destination would be. But the challenging part as we put this corridor together is, for our light rail system that exists today, or at least the standard that we have, is we would put back all the vehicle lanes, and then you have to add more width to accommodate the guideway for the light rail. And then it even gets wider when you have to accommodate for stations. So one of the things that we worked with the community on and had many, many meetings, and you'll see here shortly how many meetings we've had throughout the duration of this project, is trying to find a way, some kind of a hybrid way that meets the need to not have to have so many right-of-way impacts, but at the same time doesn't put the lane configurations in a way where we would just have one lane and it would have lots of massive backups, but still be inviting to vehicles at some level. So, and that's what we did. So what we offered is, you'll see 4 what we're calling flared intersections. And the next slide will give you a much better idea of what the flared intersections look like. So we're recommending that it's going to be 2 lanes in each direction, 1 lane in each direction, 2 lanes total. And then at the major intersections, we would then have flare outs, so that way we could have some more capacity for the vehicles. And this really helps us from a right-of-way perspective. Just to give you an idea as to what we're looking at, by making this adjustment, we're still going to impact about 9 buildings within the 5 miles. However, if we would have kept it with 4 lanes, 2 lanes in each direction, that number would have went from 9 to about 153 buildings. And that just is very damaging for these types of projects. The next thing we're looking at are the station locations, and they're listed there for you. But in essence, from the south to the north, you've got Baseline, Southern, Rozier, which Rozier is a half-mile street. However, it's a direct connection to South Mountain High School at 7th Street and Rozier. And then Broadway and the Audubon Center. The Audubon Center is just to the south of the riverbank, and the community was unanimously adamant about we need to have a connection to that Audubon Center and having some development in that part of the South Phoenix community. Then Buckeye Road and Lincoln. Lincoln was a lot like Audubon Center, very much supported from the community and really trying to activate that area just to the south of downtown, the warehouse district, and really trying to get some positive momentum there. Here, like I said, is an example of the flare-outs. And so, as you can see on both on the top and the bottom of this slide, it's where you have the 1 lane, and then as you approach the intersection, we would have 2 through lanes and then a dedicated left turn lane to get across the guideway. And the depth or length of these will be more refined as we complete the environmental. But just wanted to give you an idea as to what these intersections will look like as they go from 1 lane and then they actually flare out and get wider at the intersections. Here's just another example. It's a nice kind of cartoon drawing that was done up by Valley Metro and their consultants. But if you look towards the back of this slide, you'll see how it's 1 lane, then as you approach. And this could be any given intersection where you would have the crosswalk, and then you would enter from the middle like you would see today on our system. This is impossible to see, but all I wanted you to know is that every one of those blue dots represents an exact date of when we had a community meeting or attended some type of a community event. The next slide will kind of summarizes everything we've done, but it's just telling as to the amount of work that was done by the public involvement staff. because again, ultimately, those are the folks that we need to hear from because they're going to be the ones using the system. And there's a summary. So Valley Metro actually hosted 9 individual public meetings, but lots of meetings focusing on with the businesses. We needed to know what their perspective was, as this is going to have an impact on the business community. Countless amounts of public events, working with the Parks Department, Neighborhood Services Department, community partners, and going to anything we can. In fact, I think a few of us from the project are going to be passing out turkeys on Thanksgiving morning over at McDonald's on Central and Southern. Hundreds of feedback forms. So we really had a clear voice from the community as to what they wanted and envisioned this corridor to be. Similar to what you saw at the Metro Center, this is the schedule that we're at. The arrow there represents where we are currently today. So we finished up some of the initial corridor planning, and with your approval today, we would then start in January the environmental study and some of the preliminary or initial design work. I'm going to sound like a broken record again. Here's this long recommendation, but what we are recommending is for the subcommittee to recommend to the City Council to approve the roadway configurations that incorporates flared intersections, as well as the station locations at Lincoln, Buckeye, the Audubon Center, Broadway, Rozier, Southern Avenue, and Baseline, and also initiate the environmental review and the preliminary engineering for this phase of the project. And with that, we'll be happy to answer any questions.
I do have one card, so Victor Vidalis? I probably just screwed up that last name. Oh.
Good afternoon, Councilwomen and Councilman Gates. My name is Victor Vidalis. I am a business owner at 6427 South Central Avenue at Central Avenue in St. Catharines. To build on what Albert said, they have been very involved in the community, and it's been great to see Valley Metro be so proactive. I am in favor of what's being proposed, but I would like to ask that the council members actually consider, as part of this program initiative or the environmental review, is to really look at the business programs that have been utilized to North Central, as well as everything up to the Metro Center connection, because being a business owner and talking to other business owners, we still don't feel that there's a comprehensive program out there that's really helping small businesses before, during, and after construction. So if there's any way to incorporate that, to have a fully defined plan before then, would be helpful to the small business owners like myself and a number of my colleagues who own on South Central. So that's my only recommendation, is to make sure that we really define what that looks like, hopefully during this process.
Thank you. And as we've discussed before, and we've learned throughout this process over the time, each project really has a business plan that is designed for that area, because it seems like each one is a little different. We have a basic concept, but I know that this is extremely important, and we hadn't mentioned it, and I think you're well tuned to this council, knowing that it will be incorporated in some fashion, and that the plan will be developed with the business leaders as the project goes forward.
Yeah, and Councilwoman Owens, you're correct. And as we even get into the capital side of it, the fact that we do allocate money, and then from a city that we allocate money, is very unique when we talk to some of our fellow cities that have similar type projects. But we've heard loud and clear, and we're starting those conversations with the businesses that are going through it now. We're also talking with Valley Metro and what they're experiencing out in Mesa. Of course, we've learned a lot just from the first 20 miles of construction. Starting this conversation too early is never, that's what we're trying to do, is start as early as we possibly can, incorporating those conversations and actually having specific meetings with the business community as we begin the environmental process gets us way ahead of where we were before. So we're going to be constantly learning, and it's a fluid process, and like you said, each area has their own unique needs and their own dynamics, and we want to make sure that we're mindful of that and incorporating whatever we can to help businesses during construction.
Thank you. Councilwoman Gallego, did you want to make some comments?
How did you know?
Oh, lucky guess.
Very excited about this project, and obviously the federal government shares our excitement, so that is exciting. It will bring new options to an area of Phoenix where many people are really active transit users and use it as their primary mode of transportation. So I'll be glad to have them connected into our light rail system as well. And excited about the redevelopment potential, there's a lot of excitement going on in the warehouse and a lot of businesses that are telling us they have particularly younger employees who want to live on the rail and work on the rail, and now they'll have that opportunity. So thank you all for your hard work. I've been seeing Valley Metro now for many years at meetings and appreciate the extensive community involvement. So,
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Gallego, it's interesting how much federal interest there is, especially on our South Central project. I was at a meeting with the FHWA just a couple of weeks ago, and what we've heard from the Department of Transportation is that Phoenix is one of the focus areas. They've picked 19 cities as focus areas, and one of the things that they're doing is they're looking at pedestrian safety. And so in talking with them and about our opportunities, and obviously they're aware of the Tiger Grant, they've decided to focus in on Central Avenue as another one. So I think it's a very positive note to see the level of interest in our community, and especially in our South Central area, as one of their focus areas.
I do have some comments.
Councilwoman?
And it's regarding the businesses. Because I was able to, the first line of the rail, we were able really to experience what businesses went through in the first line. In that, as we phased in and as we worked on them, many businesses did suffer. And many businesses, those that were very well established and kind of knew how to manage, survived. So I have a concern with the South Rail, only because I know that area very well, and that area is very much mom and pop stores, and very much there's not a lot of corporate or established businesses that can anchor the Central Core South. And so this area, I'm hoping there's a lot of planning starting now in order to get the infrastructure ready for it to survive during the growth. In particular, developing a financial plan, a strategic plan, all those things, because families are the ones running these businesses and don't necessarily have all the techniques or skill level that other established companies would have. And so I do hope we can put this in there. I know that it's part of the future, but if it's in there, then we know that it's really being looked at and it's being developed. And so I'm worried about that piece. So thank you.
Any further comments? Motion?
move approval of staff's recommendation.
And did you want to add, develop,
Yes, I wanted to add, can I add to the motion?
That would be great.
Truly looking at a business plan and working with all the local businesses and getting that started now.
do I have a second?
Second?
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Oh, unless I decided there was a second card sitting here, I'm seeing things.
Okay, Madam Chair, while the street transportation staff is coming up, I'll introduce item 10 for you, which has to do with storm sewer and retention basin infrastructure issues. We do have a specific item at the end of the presentation that is for you to act on to recommend council approval of an IGA with the county to do some additional study. But we want to start out with a little bit bigger picture look, given all the recent storm activity, at how our systems are developed and designed, how we go about financing those systems, and what the current state is in terms of both the capital needs and the funding streams, and just have a little bit broader dialogue. But we also have a very specific recommendation related to an IGA. So Ray Dovalina and Kenny Knudsen are here from the Street Transportation Department, and they're going to kind of walk through a presentation with you about these issues.
Thank you, Rick. Madam Chair and committee members, thank you for the opportunity. As Rick mentioned, this is just an overview of all the planning that we've done and collaborations with the regional partners that we work with. In light with all of the storm events that we had the last couple of months, we're going to show some of the items that have triggered some of these discussions now. Also just looking at how do we move forward, what's the next steps and moving forward. So and historically, across the city and across the state, the region has normally gotten about 7 inches per year average-wise, and normally that's been the historic nature. I believe last year we actually were less than 3 inches in accumulation of rainfall, so it's been very low in rainfall activity for the last couple of years because of the droughts that we've had for several years that span over a decade. But on the last couple of months, we had significant rainfall that exceeded the normal 100-year events that we've had. And the misconception that typically happens is that if we say 100-year, people think that, well, it's 100 years and it's going to happen once every 100 years. In actuality, it has a 1% chance of happening in any given year. So if you can take for example, a mathematical equation, it's basically taking 100, the multiplier 100, and dividing that by the year of the storm. So if you have a 100-year storm divided under 100, that would be 1%. If you take a 50-year storm, that's 100 divided by 50, that would be a 2% chance of any given year. The same thing with 10, 100 divided by 10, that's a 10%. So I think that's a misconception that sometimes people think that, well, it's 100 years, it's going to happen once every 100 years. So it has a chance of happening in multiple times in a given year. The last couple of months that we actually had storms that exceeded a 100-year flood. We actually had storms that went from 300-year to almost 1,000-year type of storm. So that's not that's not a form of storm that we normally get. So it happened multiple times. So moving forward with some of the storm damage, as you can see, there was a lot of roads that got impacted, parks. A lot of the systems that we have in place with drainage systems, luckily they were all functioning properly. We did have a lot of activity during the storm events that we were actually pumping storm water into channels, trying to make sure that we were getting a lot of the storm water out of the roadways, out of the harm's way of people's houses. To kind of give you a perspective of the work that we did during those storms with our staff, we had over 5,000 man-hours that we experienced during that time frame. Over 900 tons of debris was removed across the roadways, drainage areas, the pipes that we have. Over 500 tons of sand were provided in collaboration with the fire department and providing that to the citizens of Phoenix and helping them try to avoid flooding issues. And over 50 miles of roadways were affected across the city, and predominantly in the southwest area. So you can imagine there was a lot of storm damage across the whole city. So in looking how we've done our partnerships, well, we can't do it alone. So we work in partnership with the Flood Control District. And we've had a successful partnership for the last 30 to 40 years with them, where they also provide funding for the city and working together. And so traditionally we've had a 50-50 cost share. So we put funding forth and they provide their funding, and so we cost share like that. And then moving forward to construction and then ultimately operations and maintenance, we hold the operations and maintenance of those projects. Just looking at the funding moving forward, predominantly we've used our general obligation bonds. We do not have an ability to use our AHR, the Arizona Highway User Revenues, and using it directly for large flood control systems. So we do use those funds for roadway-related drainage, but if it's a large flood control system, we actually have to use a separate type of funding, such as bonding, general obligation bonds. We do have other funds that we try to use that are called capital construction funding. That's the telecommunications funding that we get through working with all the telecommunication companies. So up to this point, we have well over 95% of the funds of the previous 2006 bond program that have been expended already to this point. And we do have a couple of projects. Mainly, one of the big projects that we have in downtown is Jefferson Storm Drain that runs from downtown towards the west to I-17, and that's actively wrapping up. soon. And we do have some local drainage projects following up for the next couple of years, but those are also in collaboration with the flood control district with some of their small project assistance funding that we've gotten. So that's what you see there with a couple of projects that we have. This just shows a variety of locations where we have a lot of the projects that we've done across the city with the 2006 bond program. You can see it spreads the whole gamut of the whole city and that we've done. And the next two slides are just going to show a couple of the projects that we've done with regards to the 2006 bond program. And I won't kind of go through all of them, but I can tell you there, storm drain Jefferson Street that goes from 18th Avenue to 3rd Avenue, trying to make sure we have a good drainage system for the downtown. Then moving forward with just the flood control infrastructure funding, they've also have experienced some reductions in funding. So to kind of give you a perspective, they actually started off, and about 12 years ago, their tax levy was around 30 cents per every $100 assessed value. They've actually gone down to around under 15 cents. And so you can see that the cost of their fund or their revenues have significantly gone down in recent years. And some of the challenges that they're going to be seeing is that their operations and maintenance as well has gone up. So up to this point, we're around, you can see there the chart, in 2009 they started with $60 million, and they've gone down to estimating about $40 million for 2015. So a majority of that is also the operations and maintenance that they have to do. And so that leaves about $5 to $10 million to actually provide funding for construction. So kind of looking at our needs moving forward, we've identified close to over $1 billion of needs across the whole city. And a majority of them are of major flood control systems, but a lot of them also are local drainage mitigation issues that we have across the whole city. And moving forward, how do we look at moving forward with those projects? Just in addressing how do we move forward with infrastructure needs and possible options. So one of the things after these storms that we've had, we're actually looking at a short-term, mid-term, and long-term. So we're working right now with the Planning and Development Department and identifying some potential reviews of what has been built along the South Mountain, identifying what we can do to help and provide guidance to the people that were affected. As well as looking at some hillside design standards that could possibly be added or changed to help in any future developments. The second, now I'll have on the midterm, we'll talk about that with regards to the action item that we have. But we're working with Flood Control District to identify a review of the existing plans that we have across the South Mountain area. And then the second item is, like I mentioned before, the Small Project Assistance Program. That's a small program that they have that they provide $250,000 per project, but those are the local drainage projects that we deal with. And also the impact fee structure that we have, the impact fee program that we work with Plan and Development and the development community, but also those have limitations only in certain areas where we have the impact fee program. And then always there's improvement districts, municipal improvement districts or flooding improvement districts. Those can be informed if a collection of people, residents want to do something like that. So now we go into a potential funding scenario and looking at a stormwater fee. This has been something that we've looked at in the past, but has not been predominantly something that we've moved forward. This could provide another opportunity to provide funding. So going back to the GO bonds, the only way to provide funding would be to provide some sort of a increase in property taxes. So this is another form, stormwater fee is another form to look at to generating funding to participate with the flood control district. And so here you can see just a scenario, very simple scenario of if we added a $1.50 per month, how much money we would generate, and you can see the differences there. 150 provides about $7.5 million. 250 per month provides about $12.5 million, and then up to 3.5 monthly fee would provide about over $17 million per year. So as you can see, that's just a scenario. It's something that we could look at But again, it's something that you all, as members of the council, could provide some guidance if it's something that we need to look beyond and doing something like this. In coordination with the flood control district also, there are, like I mentioned before, there are some challenges there with the flood control district. And even if we had the funding, how would they be looking at funding their infrastructure of percentage? And so we are working with the flood control district, we are working with the county manager's office and seeing what other elements can be generated from the county to explore other ways of funding. So, and looking at some of the midterm items for moving forward for the South Mountain area, we're in collaboration with the Flood Control District to do a study that would provide a revamp of there's two watersheds in the area, basically the Levine Area Drainage Master Plan and the South Phoenix Area Drainage Master Plan. And looking at, we've already planned those and have projects out there already laid out for the future if funding comes available. But this reevaluation would be looking at what happened with the recent storms and reevaluating that whole area and seeing if we need to add or change any of the concepts that we've done in the past. And also identify potential projects that could maybe accelerate within that area. And that's the portion that we want to have an action on with regards to providing about $195,000 for this restudy. The study for that area, and the overall is about $650,000 for that overall study. So we would be providing about 30% of the study. So our recommendation is to provide the county about $195,000 to participate in this study, this midterm study to identify potential projects to be accelerated in the future. And so that's the recommendation that we have for you all today.
Comments, questions? Councilwoman Gallego?
Thank you so much for your hard work on this. We get regular questions in the District 8 office from folks who say, my house has been flooded more than once. I don't want to move back in until I know it's not going to happen again. What can you do? So we'll be glad to share with them this forward motion, and thankful to the county for partnering with us. I saw Supervisor Tukri this morning at an event, announced 1,600 jobs coming, but he looked at me and said, you want to talk about flood control, don't you? So I'm glad. Everyone looks at me and thinks drainage, but this is at least I'm consistent. And so I think they are very aware and interested in partnering with us, so hopefully we can really make this a regional solution and be creative about how getting it done, because people are still very panicked every time they hear thunder or see rain in the forecast about what will happen. And I'm glad we're moving forward on this.
Other comments, questions?
Move approval of staff's recommendation.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. No further discussion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Ray. I think you, oh, no, it's Alan. Infill Development Utility Coordination.
So we didn't get to this one at the last subcommittee, and it's a topic of great interest because as we began to fill in vacant parcels, create additional density, do things like make more pedestrian-friendly environments and more shade, there are challenges with how all of that interacts with our utility easements, and not just our water and wastewater easements, but also electrical easements, et cetera. There are capacity issues as well as we increase density in the infill areas. And we're really going to do this in two steps. Today, we want to talk to you about the bigger picture issues and also some really good actions that we've already taken through our infill advisory process. And then we hope to come back in December or maybe January, we'll see, with some additional recommendations on how we might be able to do even more. We have a group working with the utilities, including our own utilities, on this subject. So with us today are Alan Stevenson and Cindy Stotler from Planning and Development, and Brandy Kelso from our utility, Water and Wastewater Department.
Thanks, Rick. Madam Chairman of the subcommittee, as Rick mentioned, this is an issue that it's a good problem to have. We're getting a lot of success in our infill development.
it is something that is an outgrowth of the previous general plan that was adopted in 2000 that called for 100,000 residents to be living in and around downtown. And so this is a continuation of a lot of those efforts. You see some pictures up here on the screen of successful things that we have had done as we've gone through this kind of infill phase, kind of 1.0, and then we'll talk a little bit about the 2.0 stuff coming up later on in December or January, as Rick mentioned. The city does have an infill development goal, and that really is promote growth and development areas by light rail and existing public infrastructure. Ms. Stotler is going to talk about how some of the changes we have previously made. We've had about 40 projects that have used that so far and been very successful, and a lot of the public outreach we did in developing those. And then Brandy's going to talk about some of the water utility issues that we face. And then I'm going to kind of close with some reInvent update as well as what our next steps are. With that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Stotler.
Thank you, Chairwoman Williams, members of the subcommittee. So in the spring of 2013, Planning and Development asked the city manager's office if we could look at infill and start working on some infill initiatives. As staff, we knew that we had issues with roadblocks in development, and we also knew that we were hearing feedback from residents, and we wanted to look at infill and figure out what we needed to do to move forward and encourage infill while building stuff that doesn't, infill projects that don't negatively affect neighborhoods. So we only wanted to hear from the true diehards, so we started the meetings in June and July of 2013, and the people who came out really, really care because they live here during the summer and they're very invested in the downtown area and the infill areas. We had everyone from residents. We went out through social media, invited everyone we could think of. So we had residents, community activists, community organizations, business owners, business people, developers, and design professionals. So a giant mix of people came out to these meetings, and it was really just a listening session. Tell us about your experience with infill. Tell us what you'd like to see. Tell us what drives infill in your opinion, if you're a businessman or a developer, and tell us what roadblocks you've experienced. And also, as neighbors, tell us what you've experienced, both positive and negative, with infill development in your neighborhood. So we had a lot of feedback. We had 10 pages of single-line, single-space comments, which we categorized and grouped into like items, and then managed to form a couple of advisory groups to move forward and come up with some initiatives to bring forth to council. So the first group is a technical group to look at city code and building code and some of the code issues and the very technical items that were, in their opinion, in developers' opinion, design professionals, and some neighborhood folks' opinion, the major roadblocks to development. And a lot of it had to do with the standards that we have in our city codes and in our building code are for suburban development, because that's what we're really good at in Phoenix, is large suburbs, big subdivisions out there where we have lots of space and we can have all the utility easements we want and all the wide roads and things like that doesn't inhibit any development. We also had a number of items that belonged in more of a neighborhood quality of life group with things like parking and parking on streets, shade, walkability, vacant lot usage, and things like that. So that's the second group that we formed. So we started meeting right away. The technical group got done very, very quickly in about 3 or 4 months and came forward with the council with recommendations. The first recommendation was to better define an infill development district so that in discussions, we brought in our sister departments, water services, fire department, public works, everyone who's involved in standards that have to do with infill development. And one of the major things was give us a more concentrated area where you really, really want to see density in this type of development, and we'll take greater risk in deregulating, be more flexible in deregulating in those areas if it's a narrowly defined area. So we can test it, we can see how it works, and then later, if it works really well and everybody likes it, we can expand it to the rest of the city. So we more narrowly defined the infill development district, and I'll have a map after this. The next thing we did was identify the major technical roadblocks that developers and design professionals said that they experienced in infill development, and we made recommendations to streamline some of the technical appeal processes. Folks who want to develop they love predictability and they like quick answers and surety going in. So we sped up the technical appeal process to give them answers quicker, and then we also provided a number of code and policy relief items for the infill development district. So right up here is the map where we narrowly defined the infill development district where this code relief would be appropriate. And as you can see, we pretty much followed the light rail and then went south along the projected light rail south extension that Albert was talking about earlier. I'm going to stick to, I have a whole page of technical recommendations that have everything to do with things like fire lane access and how we narrowed that, trash turnaround access, and we narrowed that also to help with infill development. There's a number of items that we did, but the ones that are more pertinent to the discussion today are the ones that have to do with utilities, most significantly the water. In small developments of townhomes or condominiums or single-family attached that we've brought forward, it looks like a brownstone kind of thing. There's no room for a large street or or many easements for water lines and water meters. So one of the things that Water offered up that was very, very helpful in these kind of developments was a master water meter with no technical appeal. These developments can just put in a master meter and then do private lines out to the different units and not have to have a water line with an easement to every unit, and that took up a lot less space on the property. The other thing that we did was we created a minimum standard for private access way, which is basically a private street, for this type of infill development only within the infill development district. So it's much narrower than a normal street and even more narrow than a regular private drive that you would see in a more suburban subdivision. So these, as Alan said, these new standards have been in place since January 2014, and since then we've had over 40 projects come in that infill development district area. We've started applying these technical relief items on those projects, and it's working out very, very well. We're getting very good feedback from design professionals and developers. This is an example of one of the projects we've got going. It's townhomes on 3rd, 10 townhomes on 3rd Avenue and McKinley, built by Metro West. But these are the kinds of things we're seeing in the downtown and infill areas that are really, really being helped by the code deregulation that we did. So to talk a little bit more about what we did with the street width, because it was significant to water lines and access to water lines, Brandy Kelso from Water is going to talk to you about how we got to where we got to with those.
So we have a series, thank you, Cindy, Councilwoman Williams and council members. So we started with our standard for public streets, and we kind of wanted to show this just to give an idea of the changes that we were able to make. So the standard right-of-way is about 50 feet. Obviously, it can change and vary across the city. You can drive down any street and notice the differences. But in general, this kind of shows storm drains are usually kind of down the middle. Water on one side, sewer on the other. A lot of the other utilities are closer to the sidewalk, the electrical, gas, things like that. So we started with this as our basis and kind of what kind of equipment do we need to get down a street to service the water lines, the sewer lines, and those type of things. Then we had two other options that we came up with. One was a private access way. So this is really still built to the city standards, except for it's privately owned and maintained. This is something that's been allowed for a long time. We've just gone in and kind of retrofitted how the utilities fit in that so that they can still have public water and sewer utilities within the private access way, but allow them to basically shorten the width of what they have. So you can see the roadway tract is a little under 29 feet, and then there's an 8-foot PUE on either side. So we keep the water and sewer in the roadway tract, and then all the other utilities outside of the roadway tract.
Councilman Gates.
So I know we had a long discussion of private streets last month. So when you say built to city standards, so does that mean that the city would be able to take over maintenance of these streets if it were requested down the road without any additional cost being put in towards it?
I don't want to speak for streets.
Okay.
And they're not in the room now.
Fun,
so
yeah, isn't
they
that
heard you
convenient?
might ask that question.
Yeah.
We'll make sure to get you an answer to that question. Next
It
month,
does
we're going to talk
meet-
about private
Right,
streets.
it does meet the
you.
technical, like
Yeah.
asphalt and those type of things.
Okay.
Yes, Councilman Gates, yes, this does mean, because it's built to a standard that's printed in our standards, design standards manual, we can take the street back as long as the HOA has maintained it. That's the key. So what streets will tell you is if they haven't maintained it and they have to repave it or anything like that, that's when they don't want to take it back, and we would have to go through all those costs they were talking about in the last meeting.
Can someone who has a private street now build it to this standard and then turn it over to us?
Well, here's Ray.
That's a good question.
Wow.
You just appeared.
So what's the question?
Would you like me to restate my question?
Yeah.
So, well, so is this cheaper for them to build these streets under this, to build a private access way than it is to build a street, a regular street?
Well, it's cheaper, but they actually can't build their development. There's no room for them to build a
Right.
normal standard street.
Okay.
And so these lots would stay vacant if they couldn't build it this way.
Yeah, no, yeah.
So we've created a new standard, which probably is a cheaper street than if you were building a full suburban street. But as Cindy said, it is to our standards, and as long as they maintain it, I guess, you're saying that we could accept it in the future.
Okay, so then my question is, can these other folks who have private streets right now historically, can they build it just to this standard and then have the city take over maintenance?
So I think the difference in that case would be, they're different. I mean, they're so different. It would be like me taking a single-story house and making it a double-story house, or vice versa. They've already got probably a wider street width, different. They may meet some of our standards and others they might not, but it would probably be more expensive for them to rebuild it to this particular standard that's set for the infill area. But
Madam Chair and Councilman Gates, I think going back to the point of reconstructing, I mean, that would be very expensive. It's not just adding another floor or another addition, it's actually redoing the roadway. And typically, when you go inward, as opposed to going outward, it's easier to go outward to go inward. Inward, you have to change the vertical elevation of the roadway, so there's storm drains that get affected. I mean, there's a multitude of different things to reconstruct an existing built environment.
Thank you.
Does that help?
sure. More discussion on this topic to come at the next subcommittee meeting.
Right, and I didn't mean to start the topic. We just really wanted to show that we've been real flexible of, going to this standard in these type of developments and still allow the public utilities in these situations. It really meets kind of the minimum of what we can do for maintenance. The third part that we have, which these do not meet city standards, a lot of times you might have the townhomes or brownstones come right up to what would be a right-of-way, and there's really no space for a true right-of-way width. And so these, a lot of times they want strictly a private road. It doesn't necessarily always have sidewalk or some of those other amenities, just depends on the development. And so we wanted to look at that as part of the group that Cindy talked about as to what can we do for these situations to ensure that we can still put private or public water and sewer in there and still allow them to build. And so this is kind of the bare minimum of what we can do. You can see we have a 20-foot water and sewer easement. Other utilities are outside of that, about an 8-foot PUE that the other utilities would go into. And the private road itself is about 25 feet. Our biggest concern here is really undermining. If, for instance, and part of the reason the water is in the middle of the street and the sewer is kind of off to one side is because we don't want to undermine the structures that may be really close to the easements. And so this really becomes kind of the minimum of what we can do and still protect our public utilities and not undermine, if something was to happen like a water main break, we don't want to undermine the existing structures nearby. So this kind of becomes the third option when we're looking at infill for utilities.
So, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, you're all aware of our Reinvent Phoenix project. This is our $3 million HUD grant to develop land use plans along the light rail line. So there are 5 of those plans in our draft Walkable Urban Code, which is called our WU Code, new form-based code, are all under development right now. I'm happy to report that HUD did give us an additional 6 months. So we now have until the end of June to complete these items. And so we are going to continue to refine those plans and the code, working with property owners, business owners, and residents to make some further changes to these plans, and then we'll start the hearing process now, probably in February timeframe, start moving them forward to go through the village planning committees, planning commission, back to the neighborhood housing development subcommittee, and then ultimately to the full city council. I would note that we are going to be bringing forward at the next NHD meeting our pre-development assistant grant award winners that have got approved by HUD now to help them with some of their project costs for developing some projects in and along the light rail line. So that's exciting news to bring forward as well. One of the items that were identified as part of the Reinvent Phoenix project is really illustrated in this couple of next slides here along East Van Buren Street. So this is a picture of what it exists today, and one of the consultants for Reinvent has a series of slides, but due to time I'm just going to show kind of the end result one here, and that shows some significant improvements along East Van Buren Street. So it takes it from a 4-lane cross section to 1 lane in each direction. There's a bike lane in there, there's on-street parking. You see the trees and retention areas there, additional to the improved sidewalk and then the buildings. And so this is something that is in proximity to the light rail line that's just to the south there. And one of the things that the city has done is received a MAG Design Assistance Grant to take this design concept to a next, or take this really kind of conceptual design, I should say, to another further design concept and identifying some of the issues to putting in this type of infrastructure. And so you'll see here that a couple of the big things that come up are really related to some of the utility placements and our trees and shade here. So what you see in this nice picture, it's not just a problem of you have to plant some trees to have some shade. It becomes a much greater issue because of the location of the utility lines and where they're at related to trees and those issues. And so Ms. Stotler is going to talk a little bit more about some of the PUE conflicts and things that we've seen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. So this is what I like to call our good cop, bad cop routine, because planning shows you these beautiful pictures of what everybody wants to see, and then development has to tell you what we can and can't do because we have utility lines and because we have city code requirements. So right away in the draft walkable urban code that was posted, we saw some conflicts with what was desirable, like 75% shade, things like shade structures projecting into the right-of-way, and what was possible given our code requirements. So some of the things that we're working on, and we're working with our sister departments to resolve some of these issues, when you do a plat, which is generally the first thing you do when you start a development, is you do a plat to define all the property lines and all your street and right-of-way dedications and things like that. When you do a plat, there's a mandatory 8-foot public utility easement on all sides of the street, all street fronting locations. That 8-foot public utility easement conflicts with the maximum setbacks in the walkable urban code. So in the walkable urban code, you need to put your building within 12 feet of the property line, but now you've got an 8-foot PUE, and then you're just not going to be able to make the sidewalk and the shade and the trees and everything that you want. So we're working on that. Like I said, the mandated shade structures, some of the things we would love to see, the arcade and gallery and those frontages that we want to see with the shade overlapping the sidewalk, that's in the right-of-way. The sidewalk is the right-of-way, requires a revocable permit. We don't allow permanent structures in the right-of-way in general. So a revocable permit versus a permanent structure, obviously there's a conflict there. So also, no permanent structures allowed in the public utility easement. So when you have that 8-foot public utility easement, that's a dry utility easement. So you have APS in there, and Cox and Quest and things like that. You can't put a footing in there for a building. You can't put trees with deep roots. You can only put bushes with very shallow roots and things like that. That also conflicts with the shade that we want to have on both sides of the sidewalk and the deep trees and things like that. So these are the issues that we found and are starting to work on how to resolve these conflicts. One more potential conflict that we saw pretty significant is landscape and shade structures versus water and sewer lines. So in many cases, as we learned from the water department in talking about this issue, was that along the light rail lines, when they had the light rail going through the street, they had to move the water and sewer lines over closer to the property lines on the side of the street. We cannot build right now within 10 feet. You can't put any footer or tree or anything within 10 feet of a water or sewer line. So that, again, is in conflict with what we're desiring to see, which is these maximum setbacks in the buildings and the shade right on the right-of-way. It's a good rule. The 10-foot rule is a good rule. It keeps our water service having no disruptions. No tree roots get into our water lines and cause property damage or cause service disruptions, but it doesn't allow us to have the look and feel that we are looking for in the walkable urban code. So again, something that we're working through. Our next steps, we are developing options to place the building setbacks to comply with the desires of walkability and shade in the walkable urban code, and also meet the requirements of the public utility easement, as well as the distancing requirements from water and sewer lines. We have some proposed language that we're going to bring back to you. We're also going to run them through the public process. We're still continuing to have the public meetings and go through the public process on the walkable urban code. My engineers and staff are looking at flexibility for alternative shade structures as well that don't have a footing, or that, maybe cantilever off the roof and things like that can be allowed to project into the right-of-way, but don't require us to inhibit anything in the right-of-way, or it still leaves it open so you can repair lines and things that you need to do down there. So the other thing that we're working on, and Water Services has committed to studying some tree design elements to provide some flexibility, to see among the trees that we've designated in the walkable urban code, if any of those trees have, maybe more shallower roots, and there's other ways that we could plant them with a tree guard, certain soils and watering conditions that would allow us to bring those trees closer to than 10 feet to a water or sewer line. So we are proposing right now to return in December with some of the recommendations that I talked about once we've fleshed them out, and we can come back with more solid recommendations on utility corridor issues, and then also infrastructure capacity issues that we're working on as part of the transit district plans.
Part of our Reinvent Phoenix project is looking at where there's some existing infrastructure problems. Our consultant has put together a conceptual plan, if you will, that talks about what type of intensity and building fronts may develop along there. And so they're taking that in conjunction with information from the water department so that we can identify where some of those potential shortcomings are, so that we can start having a dialogue about how to address those issues prior to somebody buying a piece of land and wanting to build on that in the future, and realizing that there's infrastructure problems there.
So our overarching message here is, if we want to transform our community, we also have to change some of our fundamental assumptions about the way in which we build things in our city. And we've done a lot already, and Cindy has, her leadership and all the people who've been involved from various departments and in the community has been truly amazing. We've really come a long way. But as you can see, we've got a list of things to do that we're working on. We plan to bring them back. Cindy's leading the charge again, and working with our partners in the utility industry. And then also, if you have any particular issue areas that you're focused on, or have heard tell of this problem or that problem, we'd like to hear about it, so we make sure that we're focusing on that as well. So thank you.
Councilwoman?
We've talked a little bit about this, but how do other cities deal with this? Because it seems like there are other urban cities where you do have more shaded corridors, and you're all laughing.
I think one of the things that other cities do is have more disruptions to their service. I was recently in Boston, and in walking around there, you can see the walkability that they have. There were also multiple streets that were just closed because people were doing infrastructure work. And so I think one of the things that the city has historically done is learn from some of our cities in the past that developed when there wasn't enough room, and we had plenty of room here, so we made sure that we gave ourselves plenty of room to avoid those things. And so that's something that is part of that internal struggle, and kind of changing the way we do things, as Rick mentioned, to get more comfortable with having some disruptions and having more street closures and some of those other things. And I think the other part of that is the consultant that the water department has hired to look at, what can you plant in those areas to have shade, where previously it wasn't as big of a concern to have shade. So we didn't go down to that level of really studying of how can you do it and coexist with the utility line. We just said, don't do it, because that's the safest thing for us to do from a utility provider perspective. And now recognizing there's some larger public purpose goals, rather than just ease of service and maintenance issues, we're now having to study how to make that happen.
What would how would our 8-foot PUE compare to a city like Boston?
I don't know exactly what their requirements, I don't know if Brandy knows.
I don't know specifically them. I do know we've been calling a lot of the other cities and finding out what kind of tree separation and things they have. Our issue is a lot of times the type of trees they have and the natural rainfall that they have doesn't make the tree roots grow as far as what we see in the desert city. Desert plants will hunt for water. And if we've got a little tiny leak in a water main, it will go towards that leak. And so some of it's just differences like that. And so that's really what our consultant's helping us do is try to figure out of the trees that we're identifying in the walkable urban code, which ones don't need as much water, aren't going to search it out as much. Are there other things we can do to protect the utilities and still have the trees within the 10 feet? So we are researching that. Some of the cities we've already talked to in the Southwest, a lot of them have the 10-foot rule as well. Some of them actually have a 20-foot rule, which I don't know how we would build anything then. So, you know, it just really depends. Another city has, I think, an 8-foot rule, but they require a root barrier and some other things that are maybe a little bit more expensive than what we would want to kind of put onto development here. So it is something we're looking at and trying to narrow down what other people are doing, both in the Southwest as well as other places.
Who has the 20-foot?
I don't recall right off the top of my head. I want to think it was...
Make sure not to go there during summer.
Right. And they, yeah, I don't, it was someone in the Southwest. I don't recall who it is.
Madam Chair, Councilman Gallego, we'll bring that information back in that December or January timeframe. That's part of this kind of infill 2.0 discussion is how do we tackle this issue so that when we bring the walkable urban code forward in April and it has recommendations about tree types and shade and all those kinds of things, we have answers to these practical utility issues. And so that's the part that we're working very hard to find those answers so that we can come back and get your input on that, then do a little more future refinement so that when we come forward in that April timeframe with the WU code, we'll have answers to those.
And this seems like a great opportunity to put this in front of our entrepreneurs, many of whom are very committed to sustainability, and say, we're not sure how to do this, but there's got to be a way to make this work.
Yeah, it's something that we can, once we have some draft things, we can talk about them.
Go ahead, Councilman Gates.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for your work on this. This is very important to, again, you know, as we would say, kind of position ourselves so that we can get out of the way of this new investment occurring in infill areas. And so, you know, we want to limit the amount of red tape that's getting in the way of achieving these things, which is what people are demanding. I mean, up in our area, you know, they want to see it in our area, which kind of raises the issue of this is great in this area, but I can think of, I mean, Sunny Slope, for example, seems like a natural for this and could really help foster development. And there are other areas of the city as well. I know we're kind of starting with this area, but that's something that I would encourage because if we're, you know, if we'd be willing to do that, I think we would see more of this infill development moving farther north and south, you know, when appropriate within the city. And then, Alan, I know you and I have been having some discussions with home builders about some of the challenges that are faced by those folks doing very small, you know, infill residential development, and appreciate your work and your team's work on that. I mean, this is a very small part of it, and an important but small part. There's so much to this, and I'm sure we'll be having further discussions about things that can be done. Again, you know, keeping in mind safety concerns, that always comes first, but to the extent that we can make it easier for this development to occur in the you know, those districts that are basically built out, like mine, I think that would be very, very good for us and encourage more development to occur. So thanks for your work on this.
I have a couple of questions, and I didn't quite understand water. When you're doing these redevelopment projects and you're putting in new water and sewer, do you coordinate and build the capacity to what's projected for new customers, or are you just same size, just doing a pure replacement. Where I'm getting at is, anything constituents hate is seeing the street torn up twice. And so I'm hoping you're going to say, yeah, we increase the capacity a little for the infill projects.
That's a great question, Councilwoman Williams. Thank you. We do have a general master plan, and we look at everything. So if we know that there's a lot of other development in the area, we definitely plan for it. Sometimes in these infill, a lot of times the capacity is already built into the overall system, and maybe they just need to take it down their small private street, or maybe they just need to go half a mile to get to a larger main. But we do look at all that when they come in and make recommendations as to if they need to put in a little bit more capacity, then we have them do that at that time. But a lot of this infill area, the major infrastructure is already there. It's just kind of getting it to the small specific spot.
Right. And Rick, you and I have had the conversations a couple of times. I remember when we first were on council, it was probably 08, 09, and we did that comprehensive street landscaping plan. Remember, with all telling them what kind of trees they had to do and the system.
Talking about the tree and shade master plan that was adopted, yes.
I think it's time to bring that back as part of this because it definitely needs to be updated and changed. And it was a great plan, it just didn't work well. So
We can do that. It's interestingly, there's a lot of issues emerging right now about conflicts between our ordinances that relate to street tree maintenance responsibility and how far away from our trash trucks and things like that trees ought to be, and our desire to have shade for pedestrians. And so we're trying to work through some issues there as well, so it's actually really good timing. We'll make that a future agenda item.
I noticed many of those trees and the streets that we have leveled off so the trucks can get under them didn't do well in the storm. They're off balance, and I think we need to look at the whole picture. I think it's very important. So, but I thank you both very much for doing this, all of you, and it is something we will continue to work on and be creative and find the solutions. You're very good at doing that, so thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll look forward to your return visit. I think that's all the time we have. We have any public? Okay. Then we will request for future agenda items. You had mentioned, and I know we had a brief discussion with staff about using stormwater runoff. I don't know if you got your answers.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Madam Chair. I think that that's something I would still be interested in getting a presentation on in the future. I know we had a very full agenda as it relates, and I guess it's actually on our list of future agenda items. So thank you.
I think December is already pretty full, if I recall. And the legislative item, he's going to come talk to each of us in regards to what you see for transportation and infrastructure needs, because we only have 3 more minutes and we need to close this out. So if I hear nothing else, we will stand adjourned.